Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries RPG podcast with John and Hannah.
Hi.
And today we're going to be cracking open the postbag once again to listen and respond to some of your lovely voicemails. And first up, we have a trio of voicemails from Randy Nichols over at the Biggest Geekest podcast. If you've not listened to that, I highly recommend you check it out. So, take it away, Randy.
Hey, John, it's Randy from Biggest Geekest. Listen to your podcast. What is that? Podcast on the episode on tips for staying in character. And I had to pause it because when you said change the names in Zoom to the character names, I was like, holy crap. So I'm doing Zoom for the first time this coming weekend with my friends. I think it's probably going to be a little less mappy and move minis around, and we're just going to stay in character and roll dice and kill things. But anyway, good tip. Enjoying the show. We're going to get back to it. Hope you guys had a good holiday. Bye.
Hey there, Randy. Thank you very much for calling in. I'm glad you found the 5 tips for staying in character useful. Mm-hmm. And I mean, yeah, it's just a very simple thing. I mean, I've often heard lots of people saying to me, you know, you should always speak to like the character rather than the player to not try and keep everyone in character. And I've got a terrible memory, so what I used to do when I used to run more in-person games is I'd have like a little index card or a piece of paper with the character names written on to remind me.
Yeah, absolutely. And another good tip for that is if you're at a con game where you don't know your players,
yeah,
you go around, you write everybody's name and everybody's character name and write it in the order that they're sitting, just to make it that little bit easier for yourself again.
I'll tell you what I've also done at cons is, like, say, get like a little index card, fold it in half so it makes like a little stand, then you put the character name on both sides so the player can see it and the GM can see it as well. But after I started getting more into online gaming, I was like, it doesn't make any sense that I'm still using a piece of paper when I'm literally looking at images of the people on screen with their names under it, and I can change the names. So I was like, I'll just change it to the character names and that'll make it nice and easy. And there is nothing wrong with using Zoom or whatever your video conferencing app of choice is to just play a game without using Roll20 or Foundry or any of these other like shenanigans. Back when Google Hangouts was a thing, I ran no end of those games where it was literally just the players and me talking and rolling a few dice. And that worked absolutely great. It was only when I went into sort of like D&D and other stuff like that where there's a bit more of a tactical edge that I started bringing in the maps. But again, they're not really 100% necessary. So, let's see what else Randy's got to say.
Hey, John and Hannah, this is Randy from Biggest Geekest. Anyway, liked your most recent podcast about setting up random encounter tables. I do wonder, though, John, do you ever have an animal or a creature, and then when they encounter it, it's not a fight. Like, I've even had like a bear. They've encountered a massive bear, and maybe he's a young bear, and he's a male, and he's on his own. And if they don't attack him, he just kind of looks at them and mills about and leaves. I really want to run more games that have random encounter tables. It's been years. I'm kind of leaning. If you've listened to Biggest Geekest, we're leaning toward old school, but mostly I'm like Hannah, I tend to run plotted campaigns, but I'm going to try to get away from that to challenge myself. Keep up the good work, and you guys take care.
Thanks again, Randy. I'm glad you enjoyed the stuff about random encounters, and I think you make a very important point there, that not all random encounters need to necessarily be a combat. And in fact, in my game, because it's a sort of survival, sort of wilderness-based game, a lot of the encounters are with like normal animals rather than like monsters in inverted commas. So I don't sort of set up what that encounter is going to be. It's just there is an animal in the vicinity. How the players deal with it is entirely up to them. So they've come across a number of animals, and we use the normal like roll to see who's surprised, roll to see how far the animal is away or the encounter is away. And there's been a few times I've seen animals and they're like, oh, there's a bear over there foraging for food. Let's just give him a bit of a wide berth and leave him alone. And if they do that, and like the bear's not spotted them, or like most animals, it's like, yeah, I'm really not going to charge those like heavily armed people. They just go on their way. They maybe spot a few details about the animal. They get to find out a bit about the flora and fauna of their area, but there's no combat. And we've had this a number of times where another one we had was where a player encountered a group of wolves, and I rolled to see how many appeared, and there was one of them. And the player and this wolf were both surprised at the same time, so they're sort of facing off against each other. And the wolf, obviously being used to having a pack with it, was just like, no, I'm not going to risk it, and just like turned around and went off into the forest looking for something easier to eat. And I think that's the joy of random encounters. You get sort of like odd moments like that. But I think the mistake some people make is they assume that all random encounters must be combat. And I don't think that's really the goal of them. The goal is just sort of say, here's something which you can interact with, and how the players interact with it and how the NPCs respond then forms the crux of the encounter. It doesn't necessarily have to be combat.
Hey, John, this is Randy from Biggest Geekus. Joe and I, Biggest Geekus, we just did an episode 20 titled, Is It OSR? It was pretty extemporaneous, not well planned, but it was very enjoyable, where we kind of mused and meandered and wondered about what makes games OSR, what makes players OSR players. We're old school gamers, but you've heard our podcast. We're not really into the OSR fully, or at least not yet. I would love to get your opinion on that. If you would be willing to take a few minutes and listen to that episode 20. It's called Is It OSR? I would really appreciate your comments, since you seem to be kind of a fan of that. Anyway, you and Hannah, keep up the good work. We'll talk to you later.
Thanks again, Randy. And I believe if you check your voicemail, there may be one or two or more messages from John.
There's a few more than one or two. Because Biggest Geeks is on Anchor, and you can only leave like a 30-second message on Anchor. So I started off sort of going like, I'll just leave a quick message, and I was like, I've not really answered some of the things they sort of mentioned in the episode. So I ended up leaving about 10 or 15 messages, which obviously, like, Randy, feel free to use or not as you see fit on Biggest Geekers. But I really did enjoy listening to that episode you recommended. And if people haven't checked that out, I would highly recommend going and listening to it. I mean, I personally tend to get a little bit sort of weary of the whole, like, what is OSR, just because I've seen so many iterations of that sort of conversation going on, and I don't think it's ever going to be fully resolved. But I thought it was very interesting listening to the Biggest Geekus episode to hear some people who are sort of interested in the OSR, but they're not really deeply involved in it, sort of giving like an outsider's like fresh perspective, really. And I don't say outsider in a bad way. I just mean, as you've said yourself, that you're not fully sort of engaged with the OSR stuff yet, Randy. And it's always interesting to like hear a bit of a fresh view rather than the same old stuff being rolled out again and again. So thank you very much for that. And I hope you don't find my immense amount of replies too onerous to listen to. And next up, we have a voicemail from Goblin's Henchman.
Hi John, hi Hannah, it's Goblin's Henchman here. So in your last episode you were talking about in-jokes in D&D, and if anyone had a few, I'm sure everyone has a few of these knocking about. But two of these occurred in my actual play of Carapace, episode 73. So I have a friend I've known since 1985, and we've been gaming on and off ever since. Anyway, two of these gags popped up in the actual play. The first one at 7 minutes, which was I draw my sword, and the second one occurred at about 28 minutes, where the playtester asked if there was a two-headed black dragon in the room. And basically, these sort of came about that because the first one was whenever I was doing a wilderness kind of travel sequence, I'd roll dice, and when I stopped rolling the dice and looked up and said, "So," everyone would say, "I draw my sword," because they knew they'd triggered a random encounter. And the second one was relating to a dungeon I was running where the players had entered, or the characters had entered a room, and it was a huge room full of treasure, heaps of gold, magic items, and I told this to the players, and they were mentally counting the gold and sharing out the treasure. And while they were doing this, I then casually dropped into the conversation, "Oh yeah, by the way, there's a two-headed black dragon on a dais," and it was a bit of a yoik moment, but we've got to laugh. Anyway, cheers, good fun.
Cheers, Goblin's Henchman. Really glad you enjoyed that episode. I know John recorded it while I was at work, so I wasn't able to add any of my in-jokes in. So, in exchange for yours, I suppose I'll throw you a couple.
Yeah, go for it. I'll throw a few of yours in.
So, in-joke in the Star Trek game, they are in an Akira-class starship. And it has Canada-class shuttles. And if you remember the animated movie from the 80s, real old school manga, there's a scene in it of two characters going, "Akira! Canada! Akira!" Which I assume is why they have Canada-class shuttles. So all the shuttles in my game were named after various anime characters, which resulted in things like characters pulling up at space station and saying, "This is the Federation shuttle, Pikachu approaching," etc. Other in-joke from the LARP that we used to go to, and one that will be recognised by people that used to read Knights of the Dinner Table. John and I actually fought a gazebo. One day, I believe it's 2008.
Yeah, a bit about that,
Yeah, one of the traders' tents took off at the LARP event and began to roll across the field towards a combat.
I should point out this was due to like ridiculously heavy winds that just got under the tent and lifted it up.
Oh, it was insane windy, that event. We lost a load of tents from our group. But it was just amazing to see how everyone on that field stopped, turned, and fought the gazebo just like the guy from the Knights of the Dinner Table cartoon. And then we stopped and went, "Damn it, we're getting no XP for this."
That's right. And we didn't. More's the pity.
Hope you enjoyed those. Have we got more post?
We have indeed. So let's go on to our next call. And thank you very much for your call in, Goblin's Henchman. And finally, we have a couple of voicemails from Joe over at the Hindsightless podcast. So let's see what Joe's got to say.
Yo, what's up, Hannah and John? Awesome episode on staying in character and just really solid advice for online play in general. That middle break that you guys talk about, it's so important, I think, for online gaming. And I was not familiar with it at all before this pandemic, because before I did all my gaming around an actual table, I really hadn't done any online gaming before this started. So back then, when we were around a real table, you could just get up, grab something to drink, go to the bathroom, whatever, and you'd still kind of be a part of the game. You could still holler stuff from the kitchen, the way my house is set up and everything. And so, yeah, just getting to know this middle break has been really interesting, and I like it. I like, for what the two of you talked about, it's a way to catch up during the game. It's pretty cool. Anyway, that's it. Peace out.
Hey Joe, glad you enjoyed the episode. And yeah, I think having a break and having a little bit of sort of scheduled time to be social and sort of catch up with people in your gaming group is really important, especially at the minute, when we can't see each other in person as we'd like. And I've got to say that although most of my games are sort of run online nowadays, just I don't live in a very big town with lots of gamers, but I'm so grateful for the fact we've got this technology now. And if there's ever a sort of time period when we need like a welcome distraction, some way to unwind, and hell, just have fun with our friends, no matter how far distant they might be geographically, then this is the time for that. So I'm really grateful we have the technology to do that, and we're not all just like sat on our own at home, so not able to communicate at all. And I know it's not the same as gaming in person or anything.
I do really miss having some mates round, rolling some dice, but it's what we've got to do, isn't it? And it is great to have the technology to do it.
And whilst I'm not one of these people who say, like, in-person gaming superior to online gaming or vice versa, because I think they're both valid forms of gaming. They're just quite different in some ways, but very similar in others. I am very thankful for the fact that with the technology we have nowadays, we can actually do this. And like I say, with everything going on at the minute and like people not being able to stay in touch with each other as much, if we didn't have this technology, not only would we not be able to game, we wouldn't be able to stay in touch with people, we wouldn't be able to find out how our loved ones are doing and things like that. So I'm really thankful for the fact that we have that.
Hey, Hannah. Hey, John. It's been happening a lot lately. I'm just sitting here prepping for a game, doing some world building, listening to some awesome podcasts. Someone starts talking about a monster, and I'm like, let's see if Pathfinder has it. Yep. So far, it's 100%. So I looked up the Cat Lord, and it's pretty much the same thing. Caster level 19 with a bunch of crazy spell-like abilities. I did notice, though, that it's based on an Animal Lord template that they applied to a Panther. So Pathfinder has a bunch of different templates, and they do have an animal lord one that you can apply to whatever type of animal, and it really just turns them into a near deity, whatever. Anyway, awesome, super fun episode. I would love an episode all about cats. Peace out.
Thanks again, Joe. Glad you enjoyed the episode. And Hannah's busy chuckling away to herself, obviously keen to do that episode on cats. For those of you who are listening, Joe was kind enough to send me a link to the Pathfinder system reference document online, which has the Animal Lord template into it, and it's pretty much as he described, but it's really interesting. It's one of the things we talked about when we're doing our Cat Lord episode. As I was saying, it's a shame there's not some sort of baseline template or like creature you can use to adapt. So I think that's really handy. I'm not sure how applicable it is for me playing earlier versions of D&D. So obviously Pathfinder's more like 3.5. I'm sure you can adapt it though.
It's D&D, isn't it? It's 6 stats and a D20. You just take what you need from the rest of it.
Yeah, exactly. So thanks very much, Joe. I'm glad you enjoyed the Cat Lord episode, and I'm sure at some point in the future we will get round to doing an episode all about cats in myth and legend. So thank you to all of our wonderful callers today. We had Randy from Biggest Geekus, of course, Goblin's Henchman, and last but by no means least, Joe from the Hindsightless podcast. If you'd like to get in touch with us, maybe tell us something you'd like to see in future on the podcast, tell us some of your gaming in-jokes or stories, or anything else you'd like to chat about, you can get in touch with us one of two ways. You can either leave us a voicemail message using the SpeakPipe website, there's a link in the description of this show, or you can send us an email to rddrpgpodcast@gmail.com. Until we see you next time, take care, stay safe, and whatever you're playing, have fun.
Bye.